This week on World Traveler Cooking, we're going to revisit Ragu alla Bolognese. Now, I previously did a Ragu alla Bolognese on a video, and a number of people from Italy pointed out things that could have been done better. Now, I took the outline of that sauce from a number of different recipes I found online, including one from great Italian chefs, and some others in Italian. And based on all of the discussions and all of the descriptions, I came to the conclusion that I should try a bunch more things. And so I've come back with a better version. It's actually, in many ways, a bit more authentic. And my view is that this is one of the tastiest sauces you can make. Now, Ragu alla Bolognese is basically, you can think of it as a three-legged stool as far as a sauce goes. People will say it's a tomato sauce or it's not a tomato sauce. Completely misses the point. I would say it's not a tomato sauce. You have tomatoes in it, but it's not a tomato sauce. Your three sort of main pillars on which this sauce rests are your vegetables, which include your tomatoes, your meat, and your wine. It's really important to recognize that this is a sauce which is a meat, wine, vegetable sauce. It's a stewed meat in a very thick tomatoey stew, but that stew also has a lot of wine in it, it has some other things, and consequently we're going to go ahead and make a really good bolognese today. Now, I'm going to start by going through each of these pillars, and then I will mention the one ingredient I didn't bring out, or the two ingredients I didn't bring out. First, for the vegetables, I have about 200 grams of onions, 2 carrots, it's going to be about 200 grams also. I would have used 2 big sticks of celery, except these weren't so big, so I used 3. It came out to be 135 grams. And then we will have tomatoes. Now, the people I've talked to from Bologna have basically said that usually they mix 2 or 3 kinds of tomatoes. I'm only going to mix 2, but I'll go through the major options that you have. One option is tomato paste. I don't have an Italian tomato paste here today, but could use one. A second kind is passata. Passata is a tomato puree that's been cooked for typically around 24 hours in the bottle. And this is the basis for many sauces. And finally, you could use basically what are crushed tomatoes and puree. Now, today I'm not going to use the crushed tomatoes. Some people really like them. They like the pieces of tomato in the sauce. But I'm going to use the tomato paste and the tomato puree. Now, of course, these will get sauteed in extra virgin olive oil. We will add our meat. I'm using the typical, from the recipes that I've seen, 2 parts beef to 1 part pork. I've also seen interviews where people were advocating equal parts pork and beef, and even 50% pork, 30% beef, 20% veal. One thing is that beef has a stronger flavor, pork has a stronger flavor, but they're different, so you definitely want to mix the two. And then for the final pillar, I'm using Vino Nobile di Montepulciano. This is a Tuscan wine. It's a nice wine from at least an area close by where Bologna is, and so consequently this is also, this strikes me as a decent wine to use. I thought about using a Barolo, but Barolos from much further north, and this is one of my go-to wines for cooking anyway. So I will use this Vino Nobile di Pulciano. Sorry, I can't roll the name off. I have 2 more ingredients I didn't bring out. One is salt, the other is milk. But let's go ahead and get started. Actually, before we get started, I want to mention one more thing. Some people like little pieces of vegetables in their sauce, some people don't. If you're one that doesn't, you can put these in a blender with some olive oil. If you like the pieces like I do, then you're much better off chopping your vegetables. So I'm going to go ahead and chop my vegetables, and then we'll be back and get started. So I've turned this burner on. Once the pan gets just a little warm, actually even before that, because I'm doing this with extra virgin olive oil, I'm going to add a amount of olive oil here into the pan, sufficient to fry my vegetables. This will take a little bit of time to heat up, but once I can see it ripple a little bit, I'll add my vegetables and I'll just start stirring. And we'll stir and sweat the vegetables for a while, and while that happens, the vegetables will release flavor. Then when we mix them with the meat, they'll lend that flavor to the meat. So this part here is called the Sofrito, and it's worth noting here that I have a lid that fits well, and consequently I'm actually not going to add water while I cook. If you don't have a lid that fits so well, or you can't turn it way down later, then you'll probably have to add some water. Amount depends, but in my case I'm not going to. So we'll be back once this is hot and we start our Sofrito. So now I can feel heat coming off the oil and I can just start to smell it. So we're going to add our vegetables. And you can see this is a fair bit of vegetables, right? And I'm just going to stir it. And I'm going to keep stirring it for a while, and these vegetables will slowly cook down a bit. So about 10 minutes I'll be back. So this Sofrito at this point is very minimally cooked. We can let it cook for a lot longer. Unfortunately, I do have things I need to do later in the day, so I'm going to cut down on the time on the Sofrito a little bit. So I'm just going to give this another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to start stirring my meat in. If there's one phase of cooking this that you can extend or shorten, it's actually the cooking of the Sofrito. So keep that in mind. As I say, I'm just going to give this another 5 minutes and I'm going to start stirring the meat in. I think this is looking good enough for me to add the meat. I'm going to start with my beef. I'm going to stir these in half a kilogram at a time. And this is a sauce that reheats very well, and you can use it for other things. I'm going to make a lasagna later to take to colleagues. So, so you can always make a lot of this sauce at once, and then keep and eat it in various ways throughout the week. It's very good on bread. It's also very good in noodles, or sorry, very good with pasta. Italians prefer if you say pasta rather than noodles. I think this has to do with specifics of the Italian language rather than English. But that's, you can put it, as I say, in the West people tend to put it on spaghetti. You can also make your own pappardelle or tagliatelle. In Italy, the most common noodle shape, and I'm going to call it that very specifically because I think in English noodle refers much more to a shape of something than to the dough composition. So the most typical shape is tagliatelle. Today I may just put it with some spaghetti, or I might make my own tagliatelle. I haven't decided. Here's the first one. You can see how much we have in terms of vegetables versus meat so far. We're going to add twice as much meat as that, but you'll see at the end it's still a fair bit of vegetables. And then once we have the meat cooked, then I'm going to stew it in wine for at least an hour before I add any tomato. Now, a lot of Italian cooks will prefer to boil the wine down quite a lot right away. I prefer not to do that. There's a trade-off here worth mentioning. If you don't boil the wine off right away, if you mess up the sauce later, it will have a bit of an alcohol flavor. On the other hand, if you get things right, which is actually not too hard to do, there's my pork, then you'll get a wonderful fragrance to the sauce. This is because alcohol is actually a solvent. And so keeping alcohol in the dish for longer brings out many of the flavors of the meat, the vegetables, and things like that. So this is my one big difference from Italian methodology of this dish, is that I add more wine and I stew it for longer, and then I open it up and evaporate the wine later. So once this is done, I'll be back and I'll add my wine. So now this is looking reasonably done. It doesn't have to be all the way uniformly done, but I'm going to go ahead and smooth this out, and then I'm going to add my wine in 1 second. So now I'm adding my wine, and as I say, I add a fair bit, usually around a third of a bottle, sometimes a little more. And basically, as soon as this starts boiling, which it already has, I'm going to put the lid on, and I'm going to turn this down as far as it goes. I'm just going to let it sit. I'll be back in an hour when we'll add our tomatoes. So, it's been an hour. You can see things have cooked down a little bit. If I stir this, it'll pop back up a little bit, but you can also see the wine's imparted its color to the meat. You can still smell a lot of fragrance here, so I'm going to start adding the tomato. And I have 700 grams of this. You can use less, but if you use less, you'll probably have to add more paste later. Now, to get the last of this tomato out, I'm going to add a bit of wine into this bottle. Doesn't take a lot, just a couple tablespoons. I'm going to cap it. See, a little bit in the bottom. And then I'm just going to shake it. You know, not all of it comes out. And I can just add it right there. Get a little more flavor too. So, here we have this. Next thing we do is we stir this together. And at this point, I typically am going to leave the lid off for like the next 20-30 minutes. Let things cook down a little bit. And the big reason for that is that this is still quite liquid. After that, I am going to start correcting. I'm going to add some of the concentrate, the tomato paste, in order to get this to the consistency I want. And I'll show you exactly how to know when you have enough. So my rough guess is it's going to take half of this tube, which is going to be 100 grams of threefold concentrate. But I'm not going to start with that much. I'm going to start with just a bit. And I'm going to stir everything together. And what I want is a sauce that's just starting to, yeah, this is good. This is right where I want it right now. Basically, you can look at two things. First of all, you shouldn't have a lot of oil floating at the top. And the second is not quite thick enough. And the second thing is you can look at how thick it is. And this part right here in the middle is just about the right thickness. You can see it will kind of hold a bit of a mound with the sauce without the liquid just running all the way out right away. And so here I'm going to let this simmer open now for about 20 or 30 minutes. That'll help the alcohol evaporate out, and this will also thicken up just a little more, and then we'll come back and look at it at that point. Also, at this point, we are going to salt this like we would a stew. So it takes a fair bit of salt. Be generous, but don't do too. But at the same time, don't go over. You can always add more salt. Taking salt out is a little more difficult. So salt it like you would a stew, and then if you were to taste it right now, it would be a little bitter from the alcohol, and it will probably be a little salty because the salt hasn't gone into all the meat and stuff. So, but if we try it again in 20-30 minutes, it should be good. So that's what we're going to do. So here we are after another 20 minutes or so, and it's still not quite as thick as I'd like. Before I put the lid back on, I'm going to add a bit more of this concentrate. And this is about the consistency that I want. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put back on the lid, and I'm going to let it simmer for another couple of hours. When I come back, we'll be ready to do a taste test. So this has been simmering for a bit more, and I want you just to take a look at this consistency. The meat has almost developed a little bit of almost a jelly consistency. It's quite fascinating. But this is what you're shooting for. And we're going to continue to let this cook for maybe another hour. And then I will probably, I think today I'm just going to take the easy way out and cook a little spaghetti for this. I don't have any tagliatelle because it's Sunday and the stores are closed. So when I come back, I'll be ready to mix and plate, sorry. In the meantime, I'm going to add a few tablespoons of milk, and I'm going to stir this in really fast. If you don't stir it in fast enough, it will curdle, which is fine. But the milk is going to add a little bit of it'll thicken it up a little bit, and it will add a smoother finish. The reason is that we have all this these acidic things in here, and it will quickly curdle the milk, and so basically it's like adding a bit of whey and cheese. There we go. And when I come back, we'll be ready to mix and serve. This is what the ragu looks like at the end. You can see it's quite thick, quite meaty, and if you like it thicker, you could add just a little more tomato paste earlier on. But this is great. Now for plating. So what I'm going to do is I will take my tongs, I will scoop out pasta, and I'll give it a little twist. As I say, a lot of folks outside of Italy serve this with spaghetti, so that's what I'm doing today. Traditionally in Italy it would be a tagliatelle, which would be your primary pasta for this. And then I will just finish it off by scooping a bit more of this luscious ragu on top. This can then be served optionally with some Parmigiano Reggiano cheese or similar. I am going to do that today, as the next step. So I've made myself a bit of pasta. I've ladled the ragu into the pasta like this. And basically you want to mix the pasta with the sauce while the pasta is still cooking so that it absorbs. Now, what I'll then do is I will plate this up and I will serve it with a bit more ragu on top. So here we have it. The spaghetti with Bolognese, Ragu alla Bolognese, topped with a bit of Parmigiano Reggiano. Note that Parmigiano Reggiano comes from the same region of Italy as Bolognese, and therefore they're going to work well together. Always try to keep your sauces and your cheeses local to each other. So, on to the taste test. So now for the taste test. This is quite something. It has a really aromatic flavor from the combination of the wine and the vegetables. The meat comes through, with a little bit of cheese on the top. This is one of my favorite Italian dishes to make. And it's nothing like you get at least in Italian restaurants here in Germany. This is delicious and really amazing. So, if you find this content interesting, I hope I've earned a like and a subscription from you. If you see things you think should be mentioned or done differently, feel free to mention them in the comments. I think that gives other cooks who are looking at this video something additional. And it's a way that you can contribute to the value of this channel. I don't ever take offense to people posting suggestions or corrections or things like that. At any rate, recipes in the description. Bon appetit, and see you next week.